The morning sun poured through the car windows as Lisa gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. In the back seat, her 8-year-old son Daniel sat quietly, his backpack pressed against his chest like a shield. Today was his first day at Riverside Elementary, and the knot in Lisa's stomach had been there since breakfast. Daniel had Down syndrome. For Lisa and her husband Tom, this was just one part of who their son was, but they knew the world didn't always see it that way. They'd spent the last 3 months fighting with the school district to get Daniel into a regular classroom instead of being separated into special education. The battle had been exhausting, filled with meetings, paperwork, and more than a few tears. But they'd won. Sort of. "You're going to have a great day, buddy," Tom said from the passenger seat, turning to flash Daniel an encouraging smile. Daniel nodded but didn't say anything. His fingers twisted the straps of his backpack. The school parking lot was chaos. Kids ran everywhere, parents called out last-minute reminders, and the sound of laughter and shouting filled the air. Lisa found a spot and turned off the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. "We can do this," Lisa said, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Daniel or herself. They walked Daniel to his classroom, and Lisa felt every stare along the way. Some parents smiled politely. Others looked away quickly. A few children pointed and whispered to their friends. Daniel seemed oblivious, his attention focused on the colorful posters covering the school walls. Mrs. Henderson stood at the classroom door, greeting students as they arrived. She was a veteran, teacher somewhere in her 50s with kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. But when she saw Daniel approaching, Lisa noticed something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or worry. "Good morning. You must be Daniel," Mrs. Henderson said, bending down to his eye level. Her voice was warm, but practiced, like someone trying very hard to sound natural. "We're so glad to have you in our class." Daniel looked at her and then at his shoes. "Hi," he said softly. The word came out a bit slurred, his speech not quite as clear as other children his age. Mrs. Henderson glanced up at Lisa and Tom. "We'll take good care of him," she said. It was the kind of thing people say when they're not entirely sure they mean it. Lisa hugged Daniel goodbye, holding on perhaps a second too long. Tom squeezed his shoulder. Then they left, and Daniel was on his own. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Henderson introduced Daniel to his assigned aide, Miss Chen. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with a gentle manner and a patience that seemed genuine. Miss Chen would stay with Daniel throughout the day, helping him follow along with lessons and navigate the social landscape of 3rd grade. "All right, class, let's settle down," Mrs. Henderson announced, clapping her hands twice. "We have a new friend joining us today. This is Daniel, and I want everyone to make him feel welcome." 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at Daniel. He sat at a desk near the back, next to Miss Chen. He offered a small wave, and a few kids waved back. But most just stared. One boy in the front row, a kid named Blake with perfectly styled hair and an expensive hoodie, leaned over to his friend and whispered something. Both boys snickered. Mrs. Henderson either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. The morning crawled by. During reading time, Mrs. Henderson asked students to take turns reading aloud from their books. When Daniel's turn came, he stood up slowly. Miss Chen had helped him practice this at home, but his parents weren't here now. His hands shook slightly as he held the book. The dog ran to the... Daniel paused, struggling with the next word. His tongue didn't always cooperate the way he wanted it to. "The park." Someone giggled. Then someone else. Daniel's cheeks flushed red. "Very good, Daniel," Mrs. Henderson said quickly, moving on to the next student. But the damage was done. Daniel sat back down, his eyes fixed on his desk. Lunchtime was worse. The cafeteria was loud and overwhelming, filled with the clatter of trays and the buzz of hundreds of conversations happening at once. Daniel got his food and looked around for somewhere to sit. Groups of kids were clustered at tables, already deep in their own worlds. He spotted an empty seat at a table near the window and headed toward it. But as he approached, one of the girls at the table put her backpack on the empty chair. "Sorry, someone's sitting here," she said, not making eye contact. Daniel moved to another table. Same thing, and another. By the time Miss Chen caught up with him, Daniel was standing alone in the middle of the cafeteria, his tray trembling in his hands. "Come on, sweetie," Miss Chen said gently. "Let's sit over here." They found a spot at a mostly empty table. Daniel ate his sandwich in silence while Miss Chen tried to make conversation. Across the cafeteria, he could see Blake and his friends, laughing at their table, surrounded by what seemed like half the grade. Daniel wondered what it felt like to belong like that. After lunch came recess, which Daniel had been looking forward to all morning. He loved being outside. At home, he'd spend hours in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball or climbing the old oak tree. But the school playground was different. It was divided into invisible territories, each claimed by different groups of kids. Near the basketball court, a game was already in full swing. Daniel wandered over and stood by the fence watching. The players were good, dribbling and passing with the kind of easy confidence that comes from playing together all the time. Daniel loved basketball. He wasn't great at it, but he loved it anyway. Blake had the ball. He made a shot, and it swished through the net perfectly. His teammates cheered and high-fived him. Daniel took a step closer to the court. "Hey," he called out, his voice barely audible over the noise of the playground. Nobody heard him. He tried again, louder this time. Can I play?" Blake stopped dribbling and turned to look at Daniel. The other kids stopped too. For a moment, everyone just stared. I don't think so, man," Blake said, bouncing the ball casually. "This game is kind of, intense. Maybe you should find something else to do." "I can play," Daniel insisted, taking another step forward. "I'm good at basketball." Blake exchanged glances with his friends. One of them snorted. "Dude, no offense, but this isn't like PE class. We're actually trying to win here." "Yeah," another kid chimed in. "Maybe try the swings or something." Daniel felt heat rising in his face again. The swings were where the kindergartners played. He wasn't a baby. He wanted to tell them that, wanted to prove he could keep up, but the words got tangled in his mouth. "It's okay, Daniel," Miss Chen said, appearing beside him. She must have been watching from nearby. "Let's go check out the monkey bars." But Daniel didn't want the monkey bars. He didn't want Miss Chen hovering over him like he was fragile. He wanted to play basketball with the other kids. He wanted to be normal. As he walked away from the court, he heard Blake say something to his friends. He couldn't make out the exact words, but he heard the laughter that followed. It was the kind of laugh that makes your stomach hurt. That's when Daniel noticed something. Past the playground, through a window in the main building, he could see into what looked like a music room. There was a piano inside, black and shiny, sitting beneath a wall of windows. A woman with gray hair was sitting at it, playing something beautiful. Daniel had never played piano before. But something about that room, that instrument, that sound drifting faintly through the glass. It called to him in a way he couldn't explain. He glanced back at the basketball court where Blake and his friends had already forgotten he existed. Then he looked at the music room again. Without saying anything to Miss Chen, Daniel started walking, toward that window, toward that sound, toward something he didn't yet understand but somehow already knew was important. His first day at Riverside Elementary wasn't going the way anyone had hoped, but sometimes the worst days lead us exactly where we need to be. The music room was tucked away in a quiet corner of the school, far from the noise of the cafeteria and the chaos of the main hallways. Daniel stood outside the door, his hand hovering over the handle. Through the small window, he could see the woman with gray hair still sitting at the piano. Her fingers danced across the keys like they were having a conversation with the instrument. Miss Chen caught up with him, slightly out of breath. "Daniel, you can't just wander off like that. I was worried." But Daniel wasn't listening. He pushed the door open slowly, and the music grew louder, wrapping around him like a warm blanket. The woman at the piano didn't stop playing. She was so lost in the music that she didn't even notice them standing there. Daniel walked closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. The melody was sad, but beautiful, like rain on a window or the feeling you get when you remember something happy from a long time ago. When the song finally ended, the woman lifted her hands from the keys and let out a long breath. That's when she turned and saw Daniel standing just a few feet away, his eyes wide with wonder. "Oh," she said, startled. "I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry," Miss Chen said quickly. "We were just—" Daniel was curious about the music. The woman studied Daniel for a moment. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and laugh lines around her mouth. Her name was Mrs. Walsh, though Daniel didn't know that yet. "Do you like music?" Mrs. Walsh asked him directly, not talking through Miss Chen the way most adults did. Daniel nodded. "It's pretty." "Would you like to try?" Mrs. Walsh gestured to the piano bench beside her. Miss Chen started to object. "Oh, I don't think we should. We need to get back to class, and Daniel doesn't know how to—" "It's just a few keys," Mrs. Walsh interrupted gently. "What harm could it do?" Daniel didn't wait for permission. He walked over and sat down on the bench, his feet barely touching the floor. Up close, the piano was huge. The keys were smooth and cool under his fingertips. He pressed one down and a clear note rang out. Then another. And another. "That's middle C," Mrs. Walsh said, pointing to the key he'd just pressed. "The whole piano is built around that note. Everything else is just variations." Daniel pressed the same key again, listening carefully to the sound. Then he pressed the one next to it. And the next one. He was making a pattern, climbing up the keyboard like steps. Mrs. Walsh watched him with growing interest. "Do you want to hear something?" she asked. Daniel nodded eagerly. Mrs. Walsh played a simple melody, just 5 notes going up and then back down. It was the kind of thing a beginner might learn in their first lesson. She played it twice, slowly, so Daniel could see exactly which key she was pressing. "Want to try?" she asked. Daniel bit his lip, concentrating hard. He placed his fingers where he'd seen hers go and pressed down. The notes came out a little clumsy, but they were the right ones. Up and down just like she'd played. Mrs. Walsh's eyebrows went up. That was good. Really good for a first try. She played something different this time, a little more complicated. 7 notes instead of 5 with a small jump in the middle. Daniel watched her fingers carefully. When she finished, he tried it himself. Again, he got it right. Not perfect, but right. Miss Chen was staring now. "How did you do that?" Daniel shrugged. "I just listened." Mrs. Walsh played something longer now, more complex. It was a piece from a cartoon Daniel sometimes watched at home. A theme song he'd heard dozens of times. She only played the first few bars, but that was enough. Daniel's face lit up. "I know that one." Without any prompting, he started playing the melody himself. His fingers stumbled here and there, and he had to pause a few times to remember what came next. But he was actually playing it. By ear, from memory, Mrs. Walsh sat perfectly still, her mouth slightly open. In 40 years of teaching music, she'd seen talented children before. Kids who could read sheet music quickly or had good rhythm. But this was something else entirely. "Daniel," she said slowly, "have you ever taken piano lessons before?" He shook his head. "No, we don't have a piano at home." "Have you played any instrument?" "No." Mrs. Walsh looked at Miss Chen, then back at Daniel. "What you just did is very, very unusual. Most people can't do that even after years of training." Daniel didn't understand what the big deal was. The music was in his head and his fingers just knew where to go. It seemed simple to him. The bell rang, sharp and loud, signaling the end of recess. Miss Chen jumped slightly. "We really need to get back to class now. Daniel's already missed the end of lunch." Daniel stood up reluctantly, his eyes lingering on the piano. "Wait," Mrs. Walsh said. "Could he come back? After school, maybe? I'd like to work with him a bit, if that's okay." Miss Chen looked uncertain. "You'd have to ask his parents. I'm just his aide." "Then I'll ask them," Mrs. Walsh said firmly. "What's Daniel's last name?" That afternoon, when Lisa and Tom picked Daniel up from school, they expected to hear about a rough first day. They'd prepared themselves for tears, for stories about kids being mean, for the possibility that they might need to fight another battle with the school district. Instead, they found Mrs. Walsh waiting by their car. "Mr. and Mrs. Cooper," she called out as they approached. "I'm Patricia Walsh, the music teacher. Could I speak with you for a moment about Daniel?" Lisa's stomach dropped. What had happened? Had Daniel done something wrong? But Mrs. Walsh was smiling. "Your son has a gift," she said without preamble. "A real one. I've been teaching music for 40 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it." She explained what had happened in the music room, how Daniel had played back melodies after hearing them just once, how he seemed to understand music instinctively. Tom and Lisa exchanged confused glances. But he's never played piano before, Tom said. Exactly, Mrs. Walsh replied. That's what makes this so remarkable. Look, I know you probably have a lot going on and I don't want to add pressure, but if you'd allow me, I'd love to give Daniel lessons, after school twice a week. No charge. Lisa felt tears pricking at her eyes. All day she'd been worried about Daniel being rejected, being made to feel less than. And here was this woman, this stranger, offering to give her son something precious. Why? Lisa asked quietly. Why would you do that? Mrs. Walsh smiled. Because every once in a while you meet a student who reminds you why you became a teacher in the first place. Daniel did that for me today. That night at dinner, Daniel was more animated than he'd been in weeks. He told his parents about the piano, about the sounds it made, about how the keys felt under his fingers. Can I go back? He asked. Can I learn more? Tom looked at his wife. They were both thinking the same thing. The piano lessons wouldn't solve Daniel's problems at school. Blake and the other kids would still exclude him. The stares and whispers wouldn't stop. But maybe, just maybe, this could be something that belonged to Daniel alone. Something that made him special in a good way. Yes, Lisa said. You can go back. Daniel beamed. And for the first time since starting at Riverside Elementary, he looked genuinely happy. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. School was still hard. Blake had started a cruel game during recess where he and his friends would see who could make Daniel the most confused by asking him complicated questions and then laughing when he struggled to answer. Mrs. Henderson tried to stop it when she noticed, but she couldn't be everywhere at once. In the classroom, Daniel still sat in the back with Miss Chen, still took longer than everyone else to finish his work, still had to leave for special services twice a week. The other kids had formed their friend groups and Daniel wasn't part of any of them. But on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, Daniel had the music room. Mrs. Walsh was unlike any teacher he'd ever had. She was patient, but she didn't treat him like he was fragile. When he made a mistake, she told him. When he did something well, she celebrated it. She never used baby talk or gave him that pitying look so many adults wore when they talked to him. She quickly realized that Daniel couldn't read traditional sheet music the way other students did. The tiny notes on the page seemed to swim and jumble in front of his eyes. So she created something different. She used colored stickers on the keys, red for C, blue for D, yellow for E, and made matching color-coded sheets. It worked. Within 2 weeks, Daniel was playing simple songs. Within a month, he'd moved on to more complex pieces. His fingers grew stronger, more confident. Music became a language he understood better than English. Mrs. Walsh started teaching him about composers, playing recordings of famous pieces and watching Daniel's face light up with recognition and joy. He had opinions about music, preferences. He loved Beethoven but thought Mozart was too fancy. He could listen to a piece once and tell Mrs. Walsh if it was from the Baroque period or the Romantic era. It was like he could hear the differences that most people spent years learning to identify. One Thursday afternoon, about 6 weeks into their lessons, Mrs. Walsh made a decision. She waited until Daniel had finished playing his practice piece, then sat down beside him on the bench. Daniel, she said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. He looked up at her, waiting. How would you feel about performing? Playing piano in front of people? Daniel's eyes went wide. Like, on a stage? Exactly like that. There's a competition coming up in 3 months. The regional youth music competition. Kids from all over the state come to play. I think you should enter. Daniel's first instinct was fear. Standing in front of people? Having everyone stare at him. That sounded terrifying. But then he thought about the piano. About the way music made him feel. About having something that was truly his. Would you be there? He asked quietly. Every second, Mrs. Walsh promised. I wouldn't let you do this alone. Daniel took a deep breath. At school, he was the kid everyone underestimated. The one who got picked last, the one people whispered about. But at that piano, he was something else. He was good at something. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Mrs. Walsh smiled, though inside she felt a flutter of nervousness. She believed in Daniel completely. But she also knew the world could be cruel. She'd seen talented kids crumble under pressure before, and Daniel had extra challenges that other children didn't face. But looking at his determined face, she pushed those doubts aside. Sometimes you had to take risks. Sometimes you had to believe that talent and heart could overcome everything else. Then let's get to work, she said, opening a new piece of music. We've got a lot to do. Daniel placed his hands on the keys, and for the next hour, nothing else existed except the music and the dream of showing everyone what he could really do. The problem started small, the way most problems do. It was a Wednesday morning, and Daniel was concentrating on his math worksheet when Blake leaned over from the next row. "Hey, Daniel," he whispered, just loud enough for nearby kids to hear. "If you're so smart, what's 5 plus 5? Daniel looked up, confused. 10, he answered. Wrong. Blake said with fake enthusiasm. It's 11. Everyone knows that. A few kids giggled. Daniel's forehead wrinkled. He knew it was 10. He was sure of it. But Blake sounded so confident, and now other kids were nodding along like Blake was right. It's 10, Daniel said again, quieter this time. Dude, are you serious right now? Blake said, shaking his head. You can't even do basic math. That's embarrassing. More laughter. Mrs. Henderson was writing on the board with her back turned, oblivious. Miss Chen was helping another student across the room. Daniel stared at his worksheet, his cheeks burning. He knew he was right, but doubt crept in anyway. That became Blake's new game. He called it Confused Daniel, though he'd never say that name out loud where teachers could hear. The rules were simple. Ask Daniel obvious questions, give him wrong answers, and see how long it took to make him doubt himself. Daniel, how many days are in a week? 9, right? Daniel, spell cat, isn't it C-A-R? Daniel, what color is the sky? I'm pretty sure it's green. Sometimes Daniel would correct Blake confidently. Other times, when Blake was particularly convincing or when multiple kids backed him up, Daniel would hesitate. And that hesitation, that moment of uncertainty on Daniel's face, was exactly what Blake wanted. It always earned him laughs from his friends. The game spread. Soon other kids were playing too, seeing who could come up with the most ridiculous false fact that Daniel might believe. It became entertainment, a way to pass boring moments between classes. The worst part was that Daniel started doubting everything. Even when no one was messing with him, he'd second-guess his own answers. During reading time, he'd stumble over words he knew perfectly well, worried that maybe he was pronouncing them wrong. During science, he'd raise his hand to answer a question, then lower it again, convinced he must be mistaken. His confidence, which had been growing so beautifully during piano lessons, began to crumble everywhere else. Lisa noticed the change at home. Daniel, who usually chattered about his day, grew quiet at dinner. He picked at his food and spent more time in his room. When she asked what was wrong, he'd just shrug and say he was tired. One night she found him sitting on his bed, staring at his hands. "Sweetie, what's going on?" she asked, sitting beside him. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then in a small voice he asked, "Mom, am I stupid?" Lisa's heart cracked. "What?" "No, Daniel, you're not stupid. Why would you even think that?" "The kids at school. They say I don't know things. They say I get everything wrong." "What kids? Who's saying this?" But Daniel wouldn't tell her. He was afraid that if he said anything, it would get worse. That Blake and the others would call him a snitch on top of everything else. Lisa tried talking to Mrs. Henderson the next day, but without specifics, there wasn't much the teacher could do. "Kids can be thoughtless sometimes," Mrs. Henderson said sympathetically. "But I haven't witnessed any direct bullying. Daniel seems to be adjusting reasonably well." Reasonably well. Those words haunted Lisa for days. The only place Daniel still felt safe was the music room. With Mrs. Walsh, nobody teased him or tried to trick him. The piano didn't lie. When he played the right notes, beautiful sounds came out. When he made a mistake, it was just a mistake. Not something to be ashamed of. They'd been working on his competition piece for weeks now. Mrs. Walsh had chosen something challenging, but not impossible. A classical piece called Für Elise by Beethoven. It started gentle and pretty, then got more complicated in the middle before returning to the gentle melody at the end. "This piece tells a story," Mrs. Walsh explained. "The composer wrote it for a woman he loved. You can hear the emotions in the music. The hope, the frustration, the tenderness. When you play it, I want you to think about what it means to you." Daniel understood. When he played, he thought about all the times he felt different. All the moments when people looked at him like he was a puzzle they didn't want to solve. But he also thought about his parents who never gave up on him. About Mrs. Walsh, who saw something in him that others missed. About the music itself, which welcomed him when nothing else did. His playing grew deeper, more emotional. Mrs. Walsh found herself getting chills during their practice sessions. This wasn't just a child playing notes on a page. This was someone pouring their heart into every measure. 2 months before the competition, Mrs. Walsh submitted Daniel's application. She didn't tell him right away because she wanted to make sure he was accepted first. When the confirmation email arrived, she printed it out and brought it to their next lesson. "You're in," she said, handing him the paper. "The competition is 8 weeks from Saturday." Daniel stared at the email, his eyes wide. It suddenly felt very real, very scary. "What if I mess up?" he asked. "Then you mess up," Mrs. Walsh said simply. "But Daniel, you've been playing this piece beautifully. I wouldn't have entered you if I didn't believe you could do this." "What if people laugh at me?" Mrs. Walsh paused. This was the question she'd been dreading, because she couldn't promise they wouldn't. She'd seen how cruel audiences could be, especially when they didn't understand something or someone who was different. "Some people might," she said honestly. "Some people laugh because they're uncomfortable, or because they don't know how to react to something unexpected. But Daniel, the moment you start playing, none of that will matter. The music will speak for you." Daniel wanted to believe her. He really did. Word about the competition spread through Riverside Elementary faster than Mrs. Walsh expected. The principal, Mr. Hawkins, heard about it from Mrs. Henderson, who'd heard it from Miss Chen. Suddenly, everyone knew that Daniel Cooper, the kid with Down syndrome, was going to perform at some fancy music competition. Mr. Hawkins saw an opportunity. The school district had been pressuring him about inclusion and diversity initiatives. Having a special needs student excel at something public could be great for the school's image. He made an announcement during morning assembly. "We have some exciting news," Mr. Hawkins said, his voice booming through the microphone. "One of our very own students, Daniel Cooper, will be representing Riverside Elementary at the Regional Youth Music Competition next month." "Let's give him a round of applause." The auditorium erupted in clapping. Daniel, sitting in the third row with his class, felt hundreds of eyes turned toward him. His face went hot. He hadn't wanted everyone to know. He'd wanted to just try his best without all this attention. Blake, sitting 2 rows back, leaned forward and whispered to his friend, "This is going to be hilarious. I'm definitely going to watch." After the assembly, things got worse. Kids who'd never spoken to Daniel before suddenly had opinions. Some were supportive, telling him good luck in the hallways, but others made jokes. "You gonna play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" one kid asked mockingly. "Can you even reach the pedals?" Another one laughed. During gym class, Blake organized a group of his friends. "We should all go watch," he said. "It'll be entertainment. Like watching a train wreck." "Dude, that's mean," one kid said half-heartedly. "I'm not being mean," Blake defended himself. "I'm just being realistic. The kid can barely talk normally and we're supposed to believe he's some piano genius? Come on, it's going to be a disaster, and honestly, it'll be kind of funny to see." Several kids agreed to go. Not because they were particularly cruel, but because they were curious. Because they were bored. Because watching someone potentially fail seemed more interesting than a regular Saturday afternoon. The news reached Daniel's parents through the school's parent email chain. Someone had shared the competition details, and suddenly Tom and Lisa's phones were buzzing with messages. Some parents sent encouraging notes. Others were more skeptical, questioning whether it was appropriate to put Daniel in such a high-pressure situation. One email particularly stung. It was from Blake's mother, who wrote, "While I admire your son's courage, I hope you've considered the emotional impact if things don't go well. Children with special needs are often more sensitive to public failure. Just something to think about." Lisa read the email 3 times, each reading making her angrier. "The nerve," she said to Tom that night. "Acting like she's concerned when really she's just saying Daniel shouldn't try." "Should we pull him out?" Tom asked quietly. It was the question they'd both been avoiding. "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "What if she's right? What if this is too much pressure? What if he fails in front of all those people and it destroys the confidence he's built?" They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Tom said, "Let's ask him. Let's ask Daniel what he wants to do." They found him in his room, sitting at the small keyboard they'd bought him so he could practice at home. His fingers moved slowly over the keys, picking out the melody of his competition piece. "Daniel," Lisa said gently, "can we talk to you about something?" He stopped playing and turned around. "The competition is getting close," Tom said, "and we know a lot of people are going to be there. It might feel scary. If you want to back out, we'll understand. No one will be mad. Daniel looked at his parents, then at the keyboard, then back at his parents. Do you think I'll mess up? He asked. No, Lisa said immediately. I think you're incredibly talented. But even talented people get nervous, and this is a big deal. Daniel thought about it. He thought about Blake and the other kids who'd be watching, hoping to see him fail. He thought about all the times people had underestimated him, talked down to him, treated him like he wasn't capable of anything special. Then he thought about the piano, about Mrs. Walsh's belief in him, about the way music made him feel like himself, fully and completely. I want to do it, he said firmly. I want to show them. Tom and Lisa exchanged glances. There was determination in their son's voice they'd never heard before. Whatever happened at that competition, win or lose, Daniel had already decided it was worth the risk. Then we're with you, Lisa said, pulling him into a hug, every step of the way. But as she held her son, she couldn't shake the worry gnawing at her stomach. In 3 weeks, Daniel would walk onto a stage in front of hundreds of strangers. Some would be rooting for him. Others would be waiting for him to fail. And there was nothing she could do to protect him from whatever came next. The last 2 weeks before the competition passed in a blur of practice and anxiety. Daniel's fingers were sore from playing the same piece over and over. He could play for Elise in his sleep now. Sometimes he did, his hands moving against his blankets in the middle of the night, pressing invisible keys. Mrs. Walsh had shifted their practice sessions from twice a week to every day after school. She worked with Daniel on more than just the notes. She taught him how to walk onto a stage with confidence, how to bow, how to adjust the piano bench, how to handle his nerves. When you get scared, focus on your breathing, she told him during one session. Take 3 deep breaths before you start playing. It tells your body to calm down. They practiced that too. Walking out, bowing to an empty music room, sitting at the bench, 3 deep breaths, then playing, over and over until it became automatic. But no amount of practice could prepare Daniel for what happened the day before the competition. It was Friday afternoon, the final school day before the Saturday performance. Daniel was at his locker, gathering his books to go home, when Blake appeared beside him. Several of Blake's friends stood nearby, forming a loose circle. Hey, Daniel, Blake said. His voice carrying that fake friendliness that always meant trouble was coming. Big day tomorrow, huh? Daniel didn't look up. Yeah, you nervous? A little. Blake leaned against the locker next to Daniel's. Can I be honest with you, man? Like real talk? Daniel finally looked at him. Blake's face was serious, almost concerned. For a second, Daniel thought maybe Blake was going to say something nice. Maybe all this time Blake had been jealous or confused, and now he was finally going to apologize. I think you should know something, Blake continued, his voice low and sincere. My mom's friend is one of the judges at the competition tomorrow, and she told my mom that they already know about you. Daniel's stomach tightened. Know what? That you're, you know. Blake gestured vaguely at Daniel. Different. And apparently they're worried because this is a serious competition, and they don't want it to become some kind of pity thing. Like they're expecting you to mess up and they're already planning to just be nice about it and give you a participation ribbon or whatever. One of Blake's friends chimed in. Yeah, my dad said the same thing. He said they probably shouldn't have even let you enter. Daniel felt like the floor was tilting. That's not true. I'm just trying to help you out, Blake said, putting his hand on Daniel's shoulder in a gesture that looked friendly to anyone passing by. I'd want someone to tell me if everyone was expecting me to fail. It's going to be pretty embarrassing tomorrow. Like really embarrassing. Everyone's going to be watching and they're all going to see that you can't actually do this. I can do it, Daniel said, but his voice came out shaky. Can you, though? Blake's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. I mean, you can barely read in class. You need Miss Chen to help you with everything. And you think you're going to get up on a stage in front of hundreds of people and play piano? Come on, man. Be realistic. The other kids were nodding now, their faces showing what looked like genuine concern. They'd perfected this act, how to bully someone while looking like they were just being honest friends. Mrs. Walsh thinks I can do it, Daniel said quietly. Blake laughed. Not meanly, but like someone who'd just heard something sadly naive. Mrs. Walsh is old, dude. She's retiring after this year. She probably just feels sorry for you and didn't want to hurt your feelings by saying no. That's what adults do. They lie to be nice. Daniel's hands were trembling now. The books he was holding felt impossibly heavy. Look, I'm just saying, Blake continued, if I were you, I'd fake being sick tomorrow. Tell your parents you have a stomachache or something. It's better than humiliating yourself in front of everyone. Trust me, I'm trying to save you here. Blake patted Daniel's shoulder one more time, then walked away with his friends, leaving Daniel standing alone in the hallway, his entire body shaking. Miss Chen found him there 10 minutes later, still frozen in place, tears streaming down his face. Daniel? Sweetie, what happened? But Daniel couldn't speak. The words Blake had said were echoing in his head, mixing with every doubt he'd ever had about himself. What if Blake was right? What if Mrs. Walsh had only been humoring him? What if tomorrow was going to be the most embarrassing moment of his entire life? Miss Chen walked Daniel to the music room, where Mrs. Walsh was organizing sheet music for the weekend. Something happened, Miss Chen said quietly to Mrs. Walsh. I don't know what, but he's really upset. Mrs. Walsh took one look at Daniel's tear-stained face and dismissed Miss Chen gently. I've got him from here. When they were alone, Mrs. Walsh sat Daniel down at the piano bench and pulled up a chair beside him. Talk to me, she said simply. At first, Daniel couldn't. The words were stuck behind the lump in his throat. But slowly, bit by bit, it all came out. Everything Blake had said. The judges knowing about him. The participation ribbon. Everyone expecting him to fail. Mrs. Walsh listened without interrupting. When Daniel finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Daniel, she said finally, can I tell you something? Something true? He nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. I've been teaching music for 42 years. I've had students win state championships. I've had students go on to play at Carnegie Hall. I've had students who were technically perfect, who never missed a note, who could sight read anything you put in front of them. She paused. And you know what? You're better than all of them. Daniel looked at her with confusion. But I mess up sometimes. And I can't read regular sheet music. And you have something they don't, Mrs. Walsh interrupted. You have soul. When you play, people feel something. That's not something you can teach. That's not something you can fake. That's a gift, Daniel. A real one. But what if Blake's right? What if everyone's just being nice? Mrs. Walsh smiled sadly. Do you know how I know that boy was lying? Because there are no judges who know about you. The competition is blind. The judges only know your name and age, nothing else. They don't know what school you go to, what you look like, or anything about your personal life. That's how they keep it fair. Daniel's tears slowed. Really? Really? That boy said those things because he wanted to hurt you. Because he's scared. Scared of what? Of being wrong about you. Of discovering that someone he decided was less than him is actually extraordinary. Some people can't handle that, so they try to tear others down before they get the chance to rise up. Daniel was quiet, processing this. Here's what I want you to do, Mrs. Walsh said. I want you to go home tonight, eat a good dinner, get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow I want you to walk onto that stage and show everyone who you really are. Not who they think you are. Not who they've decided you should be. Who you actually are. What if I mess up? Then you mess up. But you'll do it honestly, giving it everything you have. That's all anyone can do, Daniel. That's all anyone should do. Daniel looked at the piano. His piano. The instrument that had given him something no one could take away. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it, Mrs. Walsh smiled. That's my boy. She walked him out to the parking lot where his parents were waiting. Lisa took one look at Daniel's puffy eyes and shot Mrs. Walsh a concerned look. He's okay, Mrs. Walsh assured her. Just pre-performance jitters. Totally normal. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet in the back seat. Lisa and Tom exchanged worried glances but didn't push him to talk. That night, Daniel barely touched his dinner. He went to bed early but couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying Blake's words over and over. What if everyone really was expecting him to fail? What if he got on that stage and forgot everything? What if his fingers froze? What if people laughed? Around midnight, his door creaked open. Tom peeked in. Can't sleep either, huh? He said softly. Daniel shook his head. Tom came in and sat on the edge of the bed. Want to know a secret? Your mom and I are terrified too. You are. Absolutely. Not because we think you'll fail, but because we love you so much that the thought of anyone being mean to you makes us want to fight the whole world. Tom smiled. But you know what? We're also proud. So incredibly proud. Because you're brave enough to try something scary. Most people never do that, Daniel. Most people play it safe their whole lives. What if I'm not good enough? Tom was quiet for a moment. You know what makes someone good enough? Showing up, trying, giving it your best shot. Everything else is just noise. He stayed with Daniel until his son finally drifted off to sleep, one hand curled under his pillow, the other resting on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. Tomorrow would come whether they were ready or not. The stage would be set. The audience would gather. The judges would take their seats. And Daniel would have to face the moment that would change everything. But tonight, he was just a boy sleeping in his room, dreaming of music, surrounded by people who loved him no matter what happened next. The sun would rise in a few hours, and with it, Daniel's chance to show the world who he truly was. In the house next door, Blake was also awake, scrolling through his phone, texting friends about tomorrow. "This is going to be so funny," he typed. "Can't wait." He had no idea that by this time tomorrow he'd be the one who couldn't sleep. But for entirely different reasons. The competition was less than 12 hours away, and nothing would ever be the same again. The auditorium was bigger than Daniel had imagined. Much bigger. Rows and rows of red velvet seats stretched back into shadows, and a massive chandelier hung from the ceiling like a crystal cloud. The stage looked miles away even though they were standing right beside it. Daniel's hands were sweating. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. The program said he was performer number 15 out of 25. That meant he'd have to sit through 14 other kids before his turn came. Lisa held his hand tightly as they found their seats in the third row. Tom sat on Daniel's other side, and Mrs. Walsh was right behind them. Miss Chen had come too, along with Mr. Hawkins, the principal. And scattered throughout the audience were faces from Riverside Elementary. Some were parents who'd come to support Daniel. Others were simply curious. In the back row, Blake sat with 6 of his friends. They'd brought snacks like they were at a movie theater. Blake had his phone ready, angled to record from his seat. He'd already decided he'd post the video later with some funny caption. His friends kept snickering and whispering, earning annoyed looks from the adults nearby. The competition began. The first performer was a tiny girl, maybe 6 years old, who played a simple Mozart piece. She was technically perfect but stiff, like she was concentrating so hard on not making mistakes that she forgot to actually feel the music. The audience clapped politely when she finished. The second performer was better. The third was excellent. By the time the 7th kid walked on stage, Daniel realized something that made his stomach drop. Everyone here was really, really good. These weren't just kids who took piano lessons. These were serious musicians. Child prodigies. Kids who'd probably been playing since they could walk. What was he doing here? He'd only been playing for a few months. Mrs. Walsh must have been crazy to think he belonged on the same stage as these kids. Performer number 10 was a boy about Daniel's age who played something fast and complicated. His fingers flying across the keys so quickly they blurred. The audience erupted in applause when he finished. Daniel heard someone behind him say, "Now that's a real pianist." His chest felt tight. He couldn't breathe right. Lisa felt him trembling and leaned close. "You okay, sweetie?" Daniel shook his head. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." "No, I can't. Did you hear that last kid?" "I'm not that good. I'm going to embarrass everyone." Tom leaned in from the other side. "Daniel, listen to me. You don't have to be like them. You just have to be you." But Daniel barely heard him. The room felt too hot, too crowded, too loud. Performer number 11 walked onto the stage. Then 12. Then 13. Each one seemed better than the last. Each round of applause felt like a reminder that Daniel didn't belong here. Mrs. Walsh tapped Daniel's shoulder from behind. When he turned, she wasn't smiling. Her face was serious. "I need you to remember something," she said quietly, urgently. "Those kids up there? They're performing. Playing notes they've memorized. Technical exercises, but you're going to do something different. You're going to share a piece of your heart. That's worth more than 1,000 perfect performances." Daniel wanted to believe her. He really did. Performer number 14 finished to thunderous applause. The announcer's voice came over the speaker system. "Next we have Daniel Cooper performing Beethoven's Für Elise." This was it. Daniel stood up on shaking legs. Lisa squeezed his hand one last time. "We love you no matter what," she whispered. He walked down the aisle toward the stage. Each step felt like walking through water. In the back row, Blake nudged his friend and held up his phone, making sure he had a good angle. "Here we go," he whispered. The stage lights were blinding. Daniel couldn't see the audience anymore, just darkness beyond the bright glow. His feet found the steps. 1, 2, 3. Then he was on the stage, standing in front of hundreds of invisible people. He walked to the piano like Mrs. Walsh had taught him. He bowed, though his legs felt like rubber. Some people in the audience whispered. He heard snippets. "Is that the boy with... How old is he? This should be interesting." Daniel sat on the bench. He adjusted it, even though it didn't really need adjusting. He was stalling. His mind had gone completely blank. He couldn't remember a single note of the piece he'd practiced thousands of times. 3 deep breaths, he reminded himself. Mrs. Walsh's voice in his head. 3 deep breaths, he breathed in, out, in, out, in, out. His hands found the keys. And suddenly he wasn't thinking anymore. His fingers just knew. The opening notes of Für Elise floated into the auditorium, gentle and sweet. Immediately something shifted in the air. The whispering stopped. People who'd been adjusting in their seats went still. Daniel played the familiar opening melody, the one everyone recognizes, even people who don't know classical music. But there was something different about the way he played it. Something raw and honest. Where other performers had played it prettily, Daniel played it like he meant it. In the audience, Lisa's eyes filled with tears before the first phrase was even finished. The piece moved into the second section, the part that was trickier, with faster notes and bigger jumps between keys. Daniel's fingers navigated it smoothly. All those hours of practice had trained his muscles to remember what his mind might forget. But it was when the music shifted to the dramatic middle section that something truly magical happened. This was the part where the gentle melody gave way to something more passionate, more intense. Some performers rushed through it, treating it like a technical obstacle to overcome. Daniel didn't rush. He leaned into every note, every chord, letting the emotion build. In the back row, Blake's phone slowly lowered. His mouth was slightly open. This wasn't what he'd expected at all. The middle section climbed and climbed, getting louder and more powerful, and Daniel played with his whole body, swaying slightly, completely lost in the music. He wasn't thinking about the audience anymore. He wasn't thinking about Blake's words or his own doubts. He was just playing, just feeling. Mrs. Walsh sat frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her face. In 42 years of teaching, she'd never heard anything quite like this. Technical perfection was one thing, but this was something else entirely. This was truth. The piece returned to the gentle opening melody, and Daniel played it even more tenderly now, like a lullaby or a memory. Every note carried the weight of everything he'd been through, the loneliness, the bullying, the moments when he felt like giving up. But also the love of his parents, the patience of Mrs. Walsh, and the discovery that he had something special inside him that no one could take away. He played the final notes, letting them ring out into the silence. Then he lifted his hands from the keys. For a moment, a long, breathless moment, there was no sound at all. Daniel sat perfectly still, his heart pounding, wondering if he'd done something wrong. Had he messed up? Had people hated it? The silence seemed to stretch forever, and then it happened. Someone stood up, then another person, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause was deafening, not polite and measured like it had been for other performers, but wild and genuine. People were cheering, actually cheering. Daniel turned on the bench, confused. Through the stage lights, he could finally see faces. His mother was crying. His father was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Mrs. Walsh had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears running between her fingers, and in the back row, Blake was standing too. Not cheering, not clapping, but standing. His phone hung loose in his hand, forgotten. His face showed something Daniel had never seen there before. Shock, maybe even shame. Daniel stood and bowed like Mrs. Walsh had taught him. The applause somehow got even louder. He walked off the stage on shaking legs, and the moment he reached the wings, Mrs. Walsh was there. She pulled him into a tight hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You beautiful, brave boy. You did it." The rest of the competition passed in a blur. Daniel barely heard the other performers. His ears were still ringing, his heart still racing. When all 25 performers had finished, the judges deliberated for 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours. Finally, the announcer returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our results. Third place went to performer number 7.